This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello everybody and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale and today I am going to be talking to Mike Medavoy, a Hollywood legend. I think that word is absolutely merited in this case. Mike has had a career that stretches from the 1960s into the present day. He has been responsible for some of the most famous and some of the best films ever, as well as during that period. As an agent, he represented the lights of New Hollywood, including Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, Terrence Malick, a whole bunch of others. He headed United Artists. He founded the Orion. He also founded and is currently the CEO of Phoenix Pictures, which made such great films as The Thin Red Line. But I mean, honestly, if you look at his IMDb page, it's not an IMDb page, it's an IMDb book. It's so big. We didn't have a huge amount of time to talk because, you know, he's a busy man. But it's such a great conversation. It's such a great honor to talk to him. He is also, of course, because this is why he's on Writers on Film, he's also the author of a memoir called You're Only as Good as Your Last One. He wrote a book called American Idol After the Iraq War, which is also well worth a read. It's a very interesting argument, and he's currently working on his third book, as you will find out in the conversation. In fact, let me just leave it there. It was a great pleasure to talk to him. If you enjoyed the conversation, remember to like. You can follow me on Twitter, Dr. Jonty, DRJONTY. But before you do any of that, enjoy the conversation. So,
okay,
super. First of all, I really enjoyed reading your book, and I love the title. You're only as good
as your next one.
Yeah, but even better, the sort of subtitle: 100 great films, 100 good films, and 100 for which I should be shot.
Yeah, well, you know, it's kind of interesting because as I go through the various titles at various times, and I have these scripts, I think, well, that wasn't very good. And sometimes, you know, it turns around, it's better than I thought. So you never know.
What made you want to write the book? What was your sort of motivating idea?
Well, you know, I've had a very kind of interesting trajectory you know, to the whole life and career. You know, every so often I stop and think about it, and if I hadn't turned out to do the things that I wound up doing, I probably would have been teaching somewhere. You know, I was basically a history major. You know, the idea of combining both that and making films, or being a part of making films, you know, seemed it was a good idea to put it down. I'm working on another, you know, on another book. Actually, this would be the third book.
Right.
And this one is more about you know, turning the clock back to my parents and examining their lives and asking, you know, the question actually was, you know, how in the hell did you wind up being Marlon Brando's executor? How did that happen? And you know, often there's not a lot of answers to that, and I've kind of figured out, you know, what it is. You know, what is survival.
And do you think that comes from your parents?
Yeah, no question. You know, they survived. You know, if you think about it, my father was born in the Ukraine, Russia. Then my mother was born in Manchuria. Her parents are from the Ukraine. Odessa.
Right.
And they both wound up in Shanghai. They got married there. What are the chances? I mean, they were one of, at the time, I think there was maybe 12,000 or 20,000 Jews living there. And then wound up going to Chile, and then from Chile to the United States. I mean, I touched on a lot. If I think about it, I missed the 40s, but that's about it. I mean, I got here in the 50s, and then, late 50s. Then I got into the business, and I got into the business just as it was changing, and I became a part of the change.
I'm so glad to hear that you're writing that book, because the one criticism I would have of You're Only as Good as Your Last One is that I really wanted to know more about that background and the family background and stuff like that, because it's such an exciting story.
It's a fascinating story, and it's great because it did a full circle on me recently when they told me that they had put together a statue of the family leaving Shanghai in bronze at the museum there. That was great. I mean, that was a interesting piece, and it just says, hey, it just went a full 360.
And when you get to start in the movie business, I love the story about you starting in the mailroom and all the people in the mailroom. Walter Hill is in the mailroom with you. I mean, that's
John Badham is in the mailroom. Walter Hill, Mark Norman, who's actually a terrific writer.
That must have been some talented mailroom.
Well, it was an interesting group of people, and we're still friends. I mean, I haven't seen Mark in a while, but I was actually picked up his book the other day, and I saw Walter maybe a few years ago. Adam, I know, is teaching, but the follow-up to that I always found kind of interesting, and that is that among the things that I was assigned to do was to be a casting director, and I worked for Jack Webb, who had a television series, and for Bob Hope. And then years later, in my last year before I went to United Artists, I became Bob Hope's agent. And that was weird.
What was he like?
What you would expect him to be like, somewhat distant, funny. I mean, at that point he had been, he was such a big star and been around for so long. But I didn't do much with him. I remember asking him, at the time, I had put 3 movies together, and it was very funny because one of them, one of them was The Sting, and I first got Redford, then I got Newman, and then the whole thing got put together. Then Young Frankenstein, I represented Gene Wilder and Peter Boyle and all the actors in it. And so I asked him to give me $5,000. I'd find a writer to do a pass at a story. And I said, you give me $2,500 and get Bing Crosby to put up the other $2,500. He said, Bing is the tightest guy I know. He'll never put up $2,500. And I thought, well, that meant he wasn't interested.
Right.
So it's interesting. I ran into Dustin Hoffman the other day, and he said, I remember when you came to me with Hook, and I said, well, who else are we going to get? I said, well, let's get Spielberg first, and then we'll get Robin Williams. That's exactly, and he said he gets a lot of comments on that movie. So, it's been an interesting voyage, and it still continues because I keep working. One
of the things that's really interesting about the book is how you meet. I mean, you do meet your legends. You sort of self-consciously go out on the town with a list and sort of cold call people and go and see them. But you also, your main sort of innovation is to grab the writers and the directors rather than the actors, the young sort of film school graduates. Yeah, and that's how I met Milius and Malick and Spielberg. Coppola was already in. Right. Matter of fact, I'm having lunch with Tony Bell today. Oh, right. Oh, give him my best.
I will.
Spielberg was one of those that you sort of got early and then let go early as well.
Yeah, I did, and I think it says a little bit about what's important to my feelings and how I feel I ought to be treated. And it was obviously not smart, but I never accused myself of being that smart.
Because you had him as a client, as you were his agent.
Yes.
And you sort of said, okay, you have to go and...
Well, there's a story behind it. And the story essentially was I put him together, made his deal at Universal TV, and he had been there, working behind the scenes. He had found somebody who was teaching him, how to edit, and made his deal. And then I guess, I don't know, 3 or 4 years after, he wanted to make movies elsewhere. And I said, well, you have to get out of this contract. And I'd just gotten Philip Kaufman out of the contract. So I thought it was doable. And he said, well, I can't do that. I don't want to do that. Now, he had a conversation with his lawyer, who I put him together with, and said that he was unhappy because he wasn't getting movies. Well, first of all, you should have told me that.
Right.
I did tell the lawyer. And the lawyer is somebody I'd put him with. And, he told me. So I really actually felt that was a betrayal. And, I wasn't going to stand for it. At that point, I had a lot of other clients. And, he's a wonderful filmmaker, a wonderful person. And he and I made another movie together talking about Hook. And we're actually working on one now. Oh,
right. Wow.
So
the relationship continues.
Yeah.
Of those early clients that you had as an agent, was there anyone who sort of surprised you the most? Who, how they developed either positively or negatively? Well,
they each had different. Malik was one kind of person. Phil Kaufman was a different kind of person. Stephen obviously turned out to be quite different. They each have their own. And there were a lot of clients at the time. I remember some of the English clients who I had who were really terrific. Carol Rice, Tony Richardson, Lindsay Anderson. I mean, can you get any better? The only one that was missing for me was David Lean.
Right.
Who I got to spend some time pretty close to his end. I probably would have wound up doing a film with him had he not died. But, you go back and look at that. Somebody told me recently that, Truffaut said to this woman who has written about him that I was the only guy that he could trust in Hollywood. First of all, I heard it secondhand, so we don't know whether it's true or not, but that was good. The fact that I had a unique relationship with Antonioni was different from everybody else.
How did that come about?
Well, he did a movie in the States called Zabriskie Point, and I wound up representing the two leads in that movie as a result of the agency I was working with at the time. And he and I became friends. The fact is that, I was different in one way, and that is that I'm much more, at the time, a much more worldly kind of guy. Somebody who'd been in a lot of places in the world, spoke other languages, had traveled, quite a bit.
And so you met him in through Zabriskie Point and became friends?
Yeah, and from there on in, we were friends. Brilliant guy. Really smart. I didn't wind up representing him, but, we became good friends, and that was great. The same is true of Pontecorvo, who I loved.
Yes, absolutely. A wonderful filmmaker.
Yeah.
One of my favorite Italian filmmakers.
Yeah, mine too. He was, he made, I think, one of the best movies, in the last 100 years.
The Battle of Algiers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got to rewatch that. I saw it the other day on I've got the Blu-ray and everything, and my daughter is doing a politics degree, and I said to her, "This is a film you have to watch. This is the political film of the 20th century."
Yeah.
The other thing that I found interesting about your book is that it is a personal memoir. Of course, it's about you going from an agent to heading a production, the production of United Artists, but it also sort of you have this shifting perspective. You're as you said just now, you're a very worldly guy who speaks different languages and has a perspective which is very broad. But you also have the perspective in Hollywood of being from mailroom to agent to head of the studios.
Right.
So does that gives you gives the reader a real sense of an outlook which is on the whole of the business?
Yeah, and the thing that's kind of interesting is that, all of our lives are constantly changing. And I mean, minute by minute, and the world changes around us. And I'm always trying to figure out what's happening, what is going on, and why am I affected by it in one form or another? What's happened to the film business generally? I mean, the film business that I grew up with is no longer there. It's a life of streaming and new ways of getting to the audience. There've been various modes tried. The big canvas, the 70 millimeter, CinemaScope. Everything's constantly changing. The key question, of course, is the personalities in it, and how different are they? Are they better, or are they worse, or are they just basically reflective of their time? And I think that's generally the case. Nobody's trying to be Gregory Peck.
It's fascinating when that idea as well of what's going on at the moment, because of course we've had COVID and we've had the pandemic, and now with what's going on in Ukraine. And I couldn't help the moment that you mentioned your mother's family coming from Odessa, the sort of like that name now means something else in the world to what it.
Yes, if I'd said that a year ago, probably would have had no impact. But now people know. They know it's a port. They know it's in the Black Sea. Yeah, but it's there's so many really interesting changes that are going on. I'm trying to keep up with it, essentially.
Well, I mean, your other book, your second book that you wrote, American Idol.
Yeah, after Iraq.
After Iraq. I mean, that's a very a book which is extremely. It's about the role of culture and art in promoting sort of values, I guess. I mean, that feels very prescient to me, that the idea of especially American culture having to not go out into the world so much as the world culture has to also come into America.
Well, that's another change, right? I mean, first of all, the whole idea of America is it's a perfect land for immigrants. I'm one, and there's because we're next to Mexico and Canada, and we have all these other places around us. People come here because they see this as a land of opportunity, and I can easily see that in my own life. But it's interesting because even then, people have, they're protecting their own territory and therefore making it harder for others, not knowing that every single one of them came out of somewhere else, unless they're American Indians.
When I look at the list of films that you were, I mean, you had an absolute run at United Artists. I mean, in terms of commercial success, but also in terms of critical success.
Yeah.
And when I look at those films like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Rocky, Annie Hall, it doesn't. I mean, we are making interesting films still, but I'm not sure if they're the big. They're as dominant as they used to be. That kind of film.
Yeah, I mean, I made this list of all the films that I've been involved with, and now so I kind of look at it. Hang on a second. I was looking at the UA, and I looked at it, and it starts with Man with a Golden Gun, Return of the Pink Panthers, Love and Death, Rollerball, Cuckoo's Nest, Annie Hall, Carrie, Network, Rocky, Bound for Glory, Pink Panther Strikes Again, Bridge Too Far, New York, New York, Apocalypse Now, Spy Who Loved Me, Equus, Semi-Tough, Coming Home, Last Waltz, Revenge of the Pink Panther, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Black Stallion, Lord of the Rings Animated, Manhattan, Raging Bull. That was the run.
That includes some of my favorite films of all time, I think. I mean, Network, Equus, I'm a huge Richard Burton fan, and Equus I love, absolutely love that film. What was the film that you felt very? I mean, there's so much to be proud there. Is it just the whole bunch together, or is there specific ones you feel particular triumph at getting over the line?
You know what? I think you look at the whole body. That's why I said a third of them somebody should have shot me, you know.
It was funny that in the book you're sort of talking about doing Rocky and doing New York, New York at the same time, and
Yeah.
everybody expects New York, New York to be the big hit, and it ends up being Rocky.
Yeah, Rocky, a boxing movie,
Mm.
you know, which hadn't done well. No boxing movie had done well. You know, you can't. It's interesting because you can't categorize almost anything. You know, if you make it well enough and it's got something going for it, and it's the right time, it does well. I mean, you know, that's true about, you know, Bull Durham was a baseball movie. You know, how do you do that?
What did William Goldman say? No, nobody knows.
Yes, that's true.
And talking also of sort of knowing people before they're famous, the transformation that you describe of Sylvester Stallone in the process of Rocky coming out and him going from a relatively humble sort of guy to, I wouldn't necessarily say a monster, but something close.
Well, it's interesting because, you know, I've seen the transformation throughout. Parts of him will never change. They'll be who he is. I think he realizes he's been extraordinarily lucky, and he's a lot smarter than people give him credit for, or that some people give him credit for. You know, and you know, he knows how to become famous. Everybody seems to be looking for that, for money. I mean, I'd like to know that if I knew that there was another life after the one we live in, then I'd worry about what I am going to leave. You know, I don't think that there is such a thing.
But I mean, in a sense, maybe values become more important.
Yeah.
You know, you haven't got a second chance, you know, so it's important to get it right this way.
One trip around it, that's it.
Yeah, and I mean that seems to be a sort of values that you're very proud of in terms of how United Artists sort of went under your sort of supervision, or when you were part of it.
But you know, you look at the Orion Pictures. There's some great films there too.
And yeah, I mean, I always remember the Orion logo coming up when I'd go to the cinema or when I'd put in a video cassette and thinking, okay, this is going to be good.
Yeah, well, most of them were. I mean, as I looked at that list, there's some really good ones. You know, Little Romance, Life of Brian.
Oh wow.
10, Caddyshack, Excalibur, Arthur. I'm looking at some of the better ones. Broadway, Danny Rose, The Bounty, Woman in Red, Amadeus, Terminator, Falcon the Snowman, Hair, Something Wild, Hoosiers, Three Amigos, Platoon, RoboCop, No Way Out, Unbearable Lightness of Being, Bull Durham, Married to the Mob, Mississippi Burning, Valmont, House of Games, Dances with the Wolves. You know, I mean, there's some good ones.
Oh, there absolutely some of the best of that period.
You know, so there.
And there's so many talented people involved as well. Jonathan Demme and
Demme,
amazing director.
Yeah. Then later on, you know, there's Philadelphia, Legends of the Fall, on and on. I mean, there's a lot of them. Yeah, there is a third of the movies.
And when you were going from one, you know, you were setting up, you sort of had these phases in your career where you were going from one studio, you were setting up new studios and production companies. That must have been sometimes quite daunting to you know, to go from a huge success as an agent, huge success as in the United Artists, and then to sort of not necessarily be beginning again, but there was an element of risk, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's always an element of risk. You get up in the morning, there's an element of risk.
Right.
You know, sometimes it's scary, you know. And one of the things I noticed, I find kind of interesting, and I think I said it in somewhere, which is that, you know, this is a business that eats its old, not the young.
Right.
You know, and in my career, I ran into times when people wanted to walk away from people like Arthur Krim or Eric because they thought they were too old. You know, I didn't want to walk away from them. I thought they had, you know, they did what they did better than I did, and I did what I did probably better than they did.
I mean, that goes back to what we were saying maybe about values as well, that you have some of those individuals who are like, you know, sort of go through your entire career, you know, Milos Forman from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Hair and all the way through. So, yeah. I mean, he must have been, you know, those are relationships that must have lasted.
They did. And of course, he lived on the East Coast. I live on the West Coast. But I mean, I've maintained those relationships with all the ones that are still alive, and that's great.
We've got a lasting legacy because of it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I feel that's what's made it interesting for me. It's what made my life interesting. Getting a phone call from an old friend saying, "Hey, I'm coming into town. Let's have dinner." I mean, how much better can it get?
Yeah, and the people who are fascinating from an intellectual point of view as well, in terms of their artists.
Oh, yeah, of course.
They're engaging in the world.
Yeah. And they also leave a legacy.
When you look at Hollywood as it is now, are there? I mean, you're saying everything is changing, and you're very much working in the business. Is there anything that you kind of, if you had a sort of a magic wand and you could change instantly, what would you change about the business?
You can't go backwards. It just doesn't work. You learn something from what happened, but it's changing. When I started, I think Disney was a theme park. Universal wasn't a theme park yet. There's new ways of showing films and making films. I mean, every day there's something new. You wonder, looking at the telescope, that found these new stars and new ways of viewing the sky. And you wonder, right, when you take all those galaxies, how is it possible that we haven't been replicated in some form? What are the chances?
It's like when there's enough combinations of something, it's inevitable that the most improbable things will happen.
Yeah, exactly.
I remember reading a quote once, which was, "On the longest timeline, the highly improbable becomes inevitable."
Yeah,
because it's just combination after combination.
Yeah.
So you're writing this third book of yours, this sort of family memoir at the moment. When is that due out? When can we expect that?
I don't know. I mean, I don't have a deal yet with somebody who's willing to print it. So I'll find out. Giving it to an agent, I think everybody likes it. They're just, the key question is, how many will it sell, right? That's what they care about. They could care less about what the content is, although they seem to like the content.
Yeah, but I mean, there's some people in the publishing industry who will be as intent on the values as you were in the film industry, hopefully.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think so. I'll show you. Can you see that or not?
Yeah, I can see that. That's the statue. That's
the statue of the family.
Wow.
The bronze. Pretty cool, right?
That's amazing. Have you ever thought of that maybe even being a film?
Somebody called me from England. They wanted to do a documentary, right? Right. On and probably using the book. My whole thing was, I'm not interested in doing a documentary about me.
Right.
Interested in that. What interests me is to say, hey, I'm not really that important. What is important is the work that I was a part of.
Right.
That's what counts. Everything else, I say, falls into it becomes, a little bit to look how great I am, and I don't want to be in that spot.
Sort of too indulgent.
Yeah.
I mean, I sort of sense that a little bit from the memoir, because you're quite, the memoir is very much about, what I did, the work I did. Here's the, it's not about, and then I went home and I felt this, or then it's all about the principles by which you operated and the things that you achieved, the occasional mistake.
Yeah, I mean, it's human.
Of the 100 films for which you should be shot, which were there any that you felt, this should have been better? This, I mean, it not should have been better, but I wish I could have rescued this one.
I can't think of one like that. There's some I shouldn't have tried. Even.
Right.
I thought it was funny, but it wasn't that funny.
Right. I think Hal Ashby's Bound. I mean, I don't think this is one of the ones.
Bound for Glory.
I think Bound for Glory should have a bigger reputation than it has.
Yeah,
I think that's a beautiful.
It was too long.
Mm.
It was too long. That was part of the problem.
David Carradine is superb in that film. He looks amazing.
Yeah, and that was it's interesting because that was part of the argument about who should play that part. And I think I tried to get Richard Dreyfuss to play it, and he turned it down on the basis of how much it would cost, or how much money he was going to get. I'm looking at these movies and I'm thinking, which ones I shouldn't have done. UHF is one of them.
Right.
But then, there's movies like House of Cards, which is, pretty good. Under Fire, which is pretty good.
The Nick Nolte.
Gorky Park was a failure, but it's not a bad movie. It's just not great. Michael Apted, I think.
Yeah, with Lee Marvin and William Hurt.
Yeah.
I can hear a dog in the background.
Yeah, it's my shepherd. I don't know what he's doing.
Well, one last question I'd like to ask, if it's okay, which is because on this podcast we're trying to encourage people to read books about movies, including obviously your book. Are there any books that you've read about the business, about cinema, biographies of filmmakers, anything like that you could recommend to our listeners that you would that you personally liked?
I'm listening to a book right now about the whole fall of Trump. It's hang on a second, just want to make sure I don't screw this up. Often if I find a really good book, I immediately think, well, is this a movie? Is this something that you can put into a film?
Well, I guess we're kind of waiting for the first Trump movie, aren't we?
Yeah, somebody's going to make it.
Sacha Baron Cohen, perhaps.
He'd be great, but I was thinking, in the best of all worlds, you would have had Peter Sellers play that part.
Oh wow, yes.
Right.
Yeah, he has exactly that, the sort of stupid man who thinks he's the cleverest man in the room.
Yeah, a movie called, a book called Peril by Bob Woodward and Robert Costa. Do you know them?
Yeah, I've read it.
I would read that book and recommend that book. I mean, there's so many interesting books. I mean, I'm a book filer, but I pick up a lot of stuff to read. But this one I'm listening to, and I just love it. It's going to be a few hours, but it's great. It's just, trying to think of other books that, I have a long list of film books here. Mark Norman's book on screenwriting is pretty good too.
Right.
I forget the title of it.
Of course, From the Mailroom.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I look at the list of, hang on a second. There's too many. Just too many that in there I went,
It's hard to pick a favorite.
Yeah, well, you need to know a little bit of each one of those.
I'm still thinking about your Peter Sellers Donald Trump movie. I'm thinking that's one of the... Who would you direct it if you could have anybody in the world to direct?
I've already talked to a director, so I don't want to talk about it.
Ah, okay. Fair enough. Okay, well, I guess that's...
Where's Stanley Kubrick when you need him?
Yeah. I mean, he's a Dr. Strangelove level sort of ironic.
Exactly right.
Yeah, satire. I'd still like to see a Sacha Baron Cohen version as well. I think that.
Yeah, no, he can actually play that kind of. He's a good idea. I mean,
he can play straight as well, Sacha Baron Cohen. I think.
Yeah, he can. He's a smart guy too. Really smart. I don't know him very well, but I must say, the little I know of him, I like him.
Yeah. His brother is a very famous psychologist. Very.
Oh,
really? Really well respected. I've read one of his books about psychopathy. I think it was about, and he's I think he's called Simon Baron Cohen. But he's very well respected, sort of. So obviously coming from a very clever family, I think.
Yeah.
Like the Attenboroughs, you know, some great dinner conversation.
Yeah. I was in London a few years ago, and I went by to see Dickie. He was, he worked with us, and I did Chaplin with him.
Right, that's a superb film.
Robert Downey Jr.
Thank you so much for your time, Mike. I really, really appreciate it.
Take care. Huh? Bye-bye.
So that was Mike Medavoy, one of the most powerful men in Hollywood, talking to John Bleasdale, an up and coming power, an up and coming. if you believe that, I've got a bridge that is going cheap. But it was brilliant talking to him. I really enjoyed it, as you could probably tell. Just such an interesting situation, being able to talk to someone who has had a hand in so many movies, and so many movies that were formative to my own love of cinema. So I was really pleased with that. His book is great, and if you have the opportunity, you should read it. It's on Audible as well. If you're an Audible member, I think it might even be included, so it doesn't cost anything for you to download and read it there. I'm not being sponsored by Audible. I don't know why I'm shilling for them. Okay, all that's left is for me to thank Elliot Atkins for the music, Ali Harwood for the artwork, Mike Medavoy for being my guest, and you, dear listener. Until next week, take care.